We are in Parashat Shemini, and when we're learning from Parashat Shavua, there's many ways what we can take something from the parasha itself. Now, there's always going to be different meanings, different information that we can take from the parasha. So in this parasha, the majority of the parasha is talking about very basic things when it comes to the korbanot, to the sacrifices. And not always one can benefit, says, okay, what does it matter for me? How to do the sacrifice? What to do with it? Which part they go on the altar? Which part doesn't go? Especially the whole book of Vayikra. A lot of the details, they seem so not so relevant to myself. But nevertheless, if it's already taught in the Torah, then there's a lot more to take from that. But in general, when we're learning from Parashat Shavua, there's always messages that one can take from that and apply it to their life. And really that's the main part what we need to take from the Torah. Because the Torah, a lot of people translate the Torah as Bible. And it's not a Bible. The Torah is a Torah. You can't call it a Bible. And definitely not anything else. But the word Torah comes from the word in Hebrew, hora'ah, to teach you something. And when you learn in the parasha, you always need to learn for something, to search and seek for a message that you can take from the parasha, from the weekly portion, to apply in your life. So in this week's parasha, besides the explanation about the sacrifices, there's a very exciting but yet sad story that happens. And from that story we can learn a lot. Of course, I'm talking about the story that the sons of Aharon died. And, a little bit of a background of the parasha. We're talking about the inauguration of the Mishkan. And in the peak of the moment, after the long wait and the long preparation and the rehearsals, and I'll explain a little bit more thoroughly very soon everything. But in the peak of the moment, where it's supposed to be the most joyous time of the day, then a tragedy happens, and two of the four sons of Aharon HaKohen, they sacrifice what's called the Esh Zara, fire that was foreign or not permitted, and they die. Can you imagine in the middle of a simcha, how many times we read, unfortunately, or saw that in the middle of a great event, there's a tragedy? I think I told you that a few times already, that when my uncle had a bar mitzvah, imagine a bar mitzvah, a big party, my grandfather goes up to the stage to give a speech. In the peak of the party, he gives a speech, and unfortunately gets a heart attack and dies on the spot. That's my grandfather. I mean, I never met him, of course. He died when my mother was a little girl. But imagine, like in the middle of a simcha, a middle of a joyous occasion, and chas v'shalom, something like this happens. And unfortunately, many times, I remember not too long ago also there was something like that, some wedding hall in Israel, and the ceiling collapsed, and everything went crumbling down, and people died there. So this is what's happening. Now, of course, comes a very big question. What is the Torah trying to tell me that in the peak of such a joyous occasion, and this is not a bar mitzvah, this is the inauguration of the Tabernacle, and such a tragedy happens that is the simcha, the joyous occasion, is mixed with sadness. Now, a little bit of a background of what's going on. In this week's parasha, we're reading about the inauguration of the Tabernacle, and the peak of the moment is when the fire came down from the heavens and consumed the sacrifices that was on it, which really what means that the Shekhinah came down, and everybody saw with their own eyes this phenomenon. Now, as this is happening, Nadav and Avihu, Aharon HaKohen has four sons, Nadav and Avihu, they do a certain act, and they, as they say in simple language, they drop dead. They're in the middle of this whole thing. Now, imagine, besides the scene, imagine what's going on now for Aharon HaKohen, that was supposed to be the most important day of his life. the day that he is first of all forgiven for participating in the golden calf. And nevertheless, that should have been the best day of his life. And in the best day of his life, in the moment, in the peak of the moment, both his sons die. And he becomes a avel, a mourner. Now, the Torah is not really explaining much about what was going on here. It just says a term that is called esh zara. Esh is a fire, zara is foreign. Basically telling us, in other words, the Torah is coming and telling us, in other words, what killed them or what caused their death was this esh zara, this foreign fire that they sacrificed or they lit up. Well, as we go, I'll explain a little bit more in details. But when I'm focusing on this specific detail, then I come and ask myself the question, what is the Torah coming and teach me? Because when you are reading from the weekly parasha, I hope you read from the weekly parasha, and if you don't, then start reading. And the best way of doing it is that you read every day the portion of the designated day. So on Shabbat, we call 7 people to go up to the Torah. Okay, later on we call the 8th person to read the maftir. But we divide it into 7 aliyot, 7 people who go up to the Torah. So the Torah is the weekly portion is divided in 7. So we read every portion, the first one on Sunday, the second one on Monday, and so forth. And by that, you're able to read the entire parasha. So if you don't do that, then start doing that. But anyways, when I go through the parasha, there's always, when I read certain things, I ask myself, what is the Torah trying to tell me here? And the Torah is not a history book. The Torah is not a geographic book. The Torah is coming to teach me something. So what is the Torah trying to teach me with the death of the 2 boys of Aharon, specifically with the Esh Zara? Now, a little bit of background of what's going on here. The building of the tabernacle took about 2 months. If you remember, Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain the 3rd time. And what does he find? He finds a party with a golden calf. Needless to say, breaks the Luchot HaBrit, the tablets. And then right after that, he goes up again to the mountain for 40 days. 40 days he's praying on our behalf. And when does he come down the final time? On Yom Kippur. Happens to be a Shabbat. And also Yom Kippur, and from that day became the day for us of atonement. So 3 times really Moshe Rabbeinu went up, but when he came down from the mountain and saw the golden calf, after that he went up again. But nevertheless, once he comes down the final time on Yom Kippur, from that moment, if you remember in the Torah, the Master of the Universe commands us, "V'asitim li migdash v'shachanti betocham," build for me a tabernacle and I will dwell in you. So the construction of the tabernacle takes 2 months. Moshe Rabbeinu hires all the artwork, Betzalel, and so forth, and they start building everything that has to be included in the Mishkan. And the construction of it takes exactly 2 months. When do they finish? They finish on a very auspicious day, the 25th day of Kislev, Kafhei Kislev, which years later becomes also Chanukah. That if you remember on Chanukah, throughout Chanukah, we read the sacrifices of the presidents every day. That's what we read in the Torah of Chanukah. But nevertheless, the construction is over on Kafhei Kislev, 25th day of Kislev. And okay, the Mishkan is ready, now what? Then Moshe Rabbeinu tells to Hashem, okay, we did everything that you told us. We have the altars, we have the menorah, we have everything, now what? Hashem says, okay, we're going to wait for a very specific day to do the inauguration. What is that day that Hashem decides? Aleph Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. A few months later. Saying in other words, the Mishkan was ready, everything was ready, they put it aside, now they're waiting. Just imagine, they're waiting from the end of Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's when the party is scheduled to happen. And exactly like in our generation, when there's a big party, you think they make it overnight. It takes sometimes a month or 2 to prepare the party. Okay. So Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, wait till Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's when there's going to be the inauguration of the Mishkan. And Hashem also explains Moshe why specifically Rosh Chodesh Nisan. He says that's the day that Yitzchak Avinu was born. And Rosh Chodesh Nisan, in case you didn't know. And what happens now? They start the rehearsals. 7 days prior to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they do the whole rehearsal of the Mishkan. Everything is done like as if it's done the real. Moshe Rabbeinu is wearing his white robe. They're coming and sacrificing, and they're doing almost everything, but that's just the rehearsal. 7 days of rehearsals. Okay. And needless to say that Aharon HaKohen, he's the star. I mean, after all, Aharon is appointed to be the Kohen. And if you remember in the beginning of the parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu gathers everybody and tells them, by the way, I want you to see with your own eyes that Aharon is the chosen one. I have nothing to do with here. Hashem chose him. Whatever Hashem told me to do, I told Aharon. So now, Moshe Rabbeinu stays a Levi, and Aharon suddenly becomes a Kohen. So everything is focused around Aharon, a Kohen. Okay, and needless to say that during that 7-day rehearsal, every time that Aharon puts something on the altar, there's no fire coming from the heaven. But they're taking it as the rehearsal at this point. Okay, now comes the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. They're all ready. Just imagine what type of an event. They're all in the desert waiting for months. Finally, the day arrives, and it's not some barbecue with some guys. This is like the event of the century. I mean, you have to understand the magnitude here. They go out of Mitzrayim. They experience the giving of the Torah. And then, of course, they see what's going on with the golden calf. And everything that's going on. And finally, they're saying, okay, maybe Hashem will forgive us for everything that we did. And they're building the tabernacle. Just imagine that, in our days, people log in to their news channel, to whatever, Facebook, to find out what's going on with Putin and Ukraine and all this nonsense. So then they logged into what's going on. Oh, today they completed the door and they did this. And this was like the talk of all the people. Okay, comes the day. Everybody's dressed fit to this wonderful day, and Aharon starts putting sacrifices on the altar, and nothing happens. Can you imagine the shame, the embarrassment? What's going on here? Everybody's whispering in the crowd. What's going on? People are taking selfies, sending each other messages. Listen, it didn't work. He put the animal on the altar, and then the fire didn't come down. I think there's a hoax here. Maybe there's a conspiracy. Okay, now of course Aharon doesn't know what's going to happen now. He's prepared for this moment. And nothing happens. Aharon calls Moshe Rabbeinu, tells him, listen, I did everything that you told me. The batteries are fully charged. I'm connected to Wi-Fi. Nothing happened. Now, of course, I'm adding all this nonsense, but try to make it a little bit humorous. But Aharon, just imagine, you have to understand that for Aharon was a big deal. Why? Because Aharon HaKohen really participated in the golden calf. Now, this is I don't want to sidetrack too much of our story, but what happened at the time with the golden calf, it's actually important to know, because who instigated the golden calf? The Erev Rav, of course. Now, what happened at the time, the sons of Bilam, which were part of the Erev Rav, they wanted to bring back to the world the grandfather. His name is Beor, and he died already. If later on, when we learn about the parasha of Bilam, it says Bilam ben Beor. So the father of Bilam, which of course we know Bilam was a mechashef, a sorcerer, a warlock, and his kids, Bilam's kids, they wanted to bring back to this world the grandfather who already died. And the Zohar says that the grandfather's soul got incarnated in the grass. So they needed the calf to eat the grass. Of course, everything was done with magic and sorcery. And they were the ones who came with the gold and told Aharon, you throw it into the fire. Everything was done with sorcery and magic. And they were planning that when the calf comes out of the fire, then it will eat from the grass that the grandfather was incarnated in, Beor, and he will come to life through this calf. And of course, as the Zohar talks about it in length, now I don't want to sidetrack, but they came to Aharon and said, came with the gold and say, you throw it in the fire. Why? To, so to say, manipulate, like as if the side of holiness allows it to happen. That it's coming through Kedusha. If they would do that, then it will come from Tumah, from impurity. But they wanted Aharon to do it, saying in other words, we agree with this whole thing. So Aharon was, of course, manipulated. They fooled him, they lied to him. But the fact was that Aharon threw the gold in the fire. And needless to say, you know the story, the calf came out, and the calf actually spoke. The golden calf spoke, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. The calf spoke the 10 commandments, so everybody was like, oh, that must be God, chas v'shalom. So, not to sidetrack, Aharon was, he had a big hand with the golden calf. So the whole part that he was supposed to take a calf and sacrifice it on the altar was to show that God is forgiving him for participating in the golden calf. Now Aharon does everything that he's supposed to do, puts the calf on the altar, nothing happens. So Aharon now says, okay, that's it. Hashem doesn't forgive me. And he falls into great sadness and despair. So he goes out to Moshe, and when I'm saying goes out of the Mishkan, and tells him, listen, it didn't work. Moshe Rabbeinu goes with Aharon into the Mishkan, and they both pray, and they say the famous verse that we say before we do mitzvot and pray, V'noam Hashem Elokeinu alenu ma'aseh yadenu konena alenu, that the actions of our hands should be blessed, and the pleasantness of Hashem should bestow upon us. And needless to say, of course, after they did that, then the Shekhinah comes down. But till this happened, since everything was around Aharon HaKohen, and like I told you, Aharon was carrying with him the trauma that he is, I can't say in charge, but that he's a big part of the golden calf. He carried on him a big weight. And when the calf that was sacrificed on the altar, the fire didn't come from the sky, he felt, that's it, I'm cursed, Hashem didn't forgive me, and so forth. But after him and Moshe Rabbeinu went into the Mishkan, the fire came down, and needless to say, the fire consumed the sacrifice. Then, of course, Aharon was like, okay, Baruch Hashem, it worked, means that Hashem forgave me, and a big burden came off his heart. And needless to say, just imagine, just that you have to tap into Aharon's mind, that he's carrying this burden for a few months, and then it doesn't work, the whole act doesn't work. He's about to completely lose his mind. Finally, the fire comes down. Baruch Hashem. And as all this is happening, boom, now his sons come closer to the Mishkan and they both die. As a fire comes from the sky, goes into their nostrils, pulls their neshamot out, and they fall dead on the floor. Just imagine now, let's try to relate with Aharon HaKohen. Now, for us, we reading this whole thing, the Torah doesn't give too much information. It just tells us that they came, ekrivu esh zara, they sacrificed a foreign fire, and they died. The Torah doesn't tell us exactly what they do, how they did, why they got killed. It just tells us like that and leaves us there. Okay. So before we take the message, let's see what really happened then. So, first of all, we have to understand that Nadav and Avihu were Kohanim. They were sons of Aharon. By nature and by birthright, they were Kohanim, priests. One of the I don't have to say jobs, but one of the tasks of a Kohen, in this time was the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, but also in the Bet HaMikdash, was what's called Avodat HaKtoret, burning the incense. And the way it worked, that in the Mishkan there were two altars. There was one altar outside, made out of copper, and the sacrifices, the animals, would be put in on it. Not only animals, because they also used to do korbanot mincha, which was oil and grains and so forth. And then there was another altar inside the Mishkan made out of gold, and that was only for the incense, and that was done twice a day. This is called Haktarat Haktoret, the Avodat Haktoret, and the Kohanim used to do it. Now, what did they do? What would you have to do is you have to take fire from the altar, and then you go into the Mishkan, and you use that fire to light up the incense. I mean, everything has to be with details and be done with cautious, of course. Now, they would take the fire from outside, go to the altar inside, and burn the fire on the gold altar. Now, and that's so to say what they did. Now comes a lot of commentaries and explaining what did they really do. And like I told you, because when you're reading in the Torah portion, it doesn't say anything. It just said that they went with Esh Zara, and that's it, and they died. Okay, so the commentaries explain that on the first day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, the fire came from above and consumed the korbanot, the sacrifices, and which means, in other words, that the first fire that came down was the fire from above, the heavenly fire. Saying, in other words, that maybe they used fire that was not supposed to be used. Maybe they brought fire from somebody who was outside smoking, and they're like, hey, can I have a light? Because that's my stupid comments. But the first commentary says, no, the fire came down from the sky, and that was the heavenly fire, the godly fire. That's the fire they were supposed to use. And they brought fire from somewhere else. Now, most of the commentaries don't agree necessarily with this commentary that they had to wait for the fire from above. Rashi, for example, says, if you're reading in the commentary of Rashi, he says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, that wasn't the problem. Rabbi Eliezer says they died because they said a halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. Hebrew says, Horu halacha lifnei Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the top, and they came and taught some halacha, some law, when Moshe Rabbeinu was there. That's disrespectful, and therefore they had to die. That's what Rashi explains based on the commentary of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, saying in other words, why is that so bad? So the Rashi and the Gemara explains, you can't do whatever you want. Moshe Rabbeinu is standing there, the chief rabbi is standing there. You can't come and do whatever you want. You have to wait for your order. And if you have a question you ask, you can't come and barged in. Imagine now, we don't have that type of status. But imagine, Moshe Rabbeinu is standing there. You don't come in and start talking and explaining a halacha. Imagine now, even in a shul, there's the rabbi of the shul, the head of the yeshiva. And imagine what a disrespect it is if somebody comes in and disturbs the rabbi and says, no, the halacha is like this and like that. Who asked you even? Did I turn to you? That's the head of the yeshiva here, the chief rabbi is here, the rabbi of the community, whatever. You don't come in and start talking in front of him. That's disrespectful. Specifically when it comes to this type of status, well, you do whatever you want. So one opinion says, it's important to remember all the opinions. One opinion says, no. The Esh Zara, this foreign fire, as they had to wait for the fire to come from above, and they used different fire. Okay, this is option number one. Option number two, and this is taught by Rabbi Eliezer, explained by Rashi, that has nothing to do with the fire. They taught halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's disrespectful. Okay. And the halacha is that hamoreh halacha bifnei rabo chayav mita. That if I come and interfere or barge in, or I come in a very disrespectful in front of the rabbi, and I come now and say the halacha, it doesn't matter right now if it's true or not, that's disrespectful, and the law is that chayav mita, the person has to be put to death. That's how severe it is. And, a lot of people might say, listen, I think that's a little bit extreme. Unfortunately, in our generation, just imagine how many times, I can tell you just on myself, but imagine how many times there's going to be a rabbi explaining something, and somebody comes and says, oh, it's not true. Or I read somewhere that it says this and that. Who asked you even? Who are you to come now and disagree or give your opinion when the rabbi is standing there. I mean, in our generation, there's zero respect to the rabbis. But I can tell you myself, many times I will, my videos go online, people write comments, and I'm like, you don't know nothing about anything, and you're coming and giving your 2 cents of your opinion. You don't understand that the halacha comes and says, Hamoreh halacha bifnei rabo chayav mita. If you're coming and disagreeing, or even not disagreeing, you're coming in front and saying, no, let me tell you, whoa, you can't do that. There's a famous story in Tanakh, I'm sure you know the story, that Hannah didn't have kids and she was praying for a kid. And finally, of course, she got her famous kid, which is Shmuel Hanavi. So the story goes that she didn't have kids. She prayed and prayed and prayed, and she made a condition with the Master of the Universe: if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to you. And of course, she gets her son Shmuel, and now she has to pay her dues. So she takes the child and she brings him to Beit HaMikdash. The child, of course, we're talking about Shmuel Hanavi, Shmuel the prophet. And she had a deal with Hashem: you give me a child, I will, she didn't say I'm going to sacrifice him, but she says I'm going to dedicate him to Kedusha. I will give him to Kedusha. Okay. So what does she do? I mean, you can't sacrifice the child. So she comes to Beit HaMikdash with Shmuel, and she brings with her an offering, what's called Korban Mincha. She brings an offering. She comes to Eli Kohen, and just imagine, Eli Kohen stands there. Hannah comes with Shmuel Hanavi and an animal. It doesn't say exactly what. It says a behemah, an animal. So Eli Kohen calls out to another Kohen, come and slaughter the animal. Shmuel steps forward and he comes and says, Shchita kshera bezar. Why are you calling a Kohen? Anybody can slaughter this animal. Oh, who are you to come and step forward in front of the Eli Kohen and say something? Eli Kohen tells him, you're right. Aval ata chayav mita. You have to be put to death. You're right. You don't need a Kohen to slaughter the animal. To sacrifice, that's a whole different thing. But to slaughter the animal? Anyone can slaughter the animal. Of course, when he's kosher for slaughtering. So Shmuel comes, assuming he was a young guy, or maybe even a boy, comes in front of the Kohen, and he says, Eli Kohen, and he says, no, why are you calling a Kohen? Anybody can slaughter it. So the answer he gets, you're right, aval ata chayav mita. You are obligated to be put to death. Hannah, in our terminology, freaks out. What? And what does she say? Al tiga banar, al tifga bo. Don't hurt the nar is a teenager, a young boy. That's a famous quote. Al tiga banar. Don't touch the boy. But why? Because hu chayav mita. He was supposed to be put to death. So we find in many places that if chas v'shalom a person steps up in an inappropriate way, when the rabbi is there and you are saying, even if it's true, he did what he said. Eli Kohen told him, "You're right, but tachayav mita." You don't do stuff like that. In our generation, there's zero. First of all, the knowledge, but now who cares? It's a problem. Because the din, the law is, Hamoreh halacha mipnei rabo chayav mita. Keep your mouth shut. The rabbi is there, let him talk. And if he gives you permission, then you come and say, okay. Why is that important to know? Because Rabbi Eliezer says, there's nothing to do with fire. They died only because Moshe Rabbeinu is standing there. They stood forward and they taught the halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. Right on the spot. They got the judgment and they died. Okay, so Rashi says, Horu halacha. Horu hora'ah. They taught the halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. This is a option number 2, right? So we said the first one is that they took fire from outside of the Mishkan. Second option, Rabbi Eliezer says that they taught the halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now there's another commentary. This is brought by Rabbi Ishmael. Also, Rashi quotes it, but Rabbi Ishmael says, no, shtuye yain nichnesu lamikdash. They came in drunk. Another option, and that's why they died. Why are you going in drunk into the Mishkan? Why would they go in drunk? First of all, we don't know 100%. Maybe they just drank a little bit. I don't think they came in like that. But maybe because Rabbi Ishmael says shtuye yain. It says shikorim. They drank wine when they walked into the Mikdash. And therefore, they had to be put to death. Now, on that, if you go into the commentary, Rashi says that in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, but Rashi also gives a hint about a story that you can find in the Midrash about a king that had a melech shayalo ben bait. That's it. Sometimes Rashi is very unclear. And Rashi says in the name of Rabbi Ishmael that they died because they drank wine going into the Mikdash. And then he gives us a hint. Oh, there's a story in the Midrash about a king who had a servant. That's it. That's what Rashi says. Okay, so let me tell you the story in the Midrash, because if you go into Rashi, Rashi doesn't say that. He's just hinting. So I'll tell you the story. There's a story in the Midrash that there was once a king, and he had a driver, a servant. It doesn't matter. It just says ben bait. Ben bait means somebody who takes care of business. If you remember Yosef, when Yosef was sold to Potiphar, then Yosef was ben bait. He was like in charge of the estate. So the Midrash says there was once a king, and he had a ben bait. He would give him all the top secret things to do. He had the codes to the safes. He did all the errands that were very important. And needless to say, the king trusted him and gave him all the keys, the codes, everything. Okay. One day, out of nowhere, the king kills him. Just like that. Now, of course, nobody knows. The king didn't say why he killed him. Everybody's shocked. Why would he kill him? He was like the taking care of business here. I mean, the king gave him so much trust. He had the keys to the safes. He had everything. The codes. Why would he kill him? But of course, nobody asked. Right after the king kills him, then the king says, okay, I need a new one. And find me another guy, a trustworthy guy. Okay, so they go and look for the right individual. They find the right person, trustworthy and so forth, and they bring him to the king. And the king tells him one rule. And he says, in that street, downtown, don't hang out there. That's what the king says to him. And why? What's so special about that street? In that street was all the casinos, the houses where, I don't know how you say it in a nice way, where women give their body as a service. This was the street of, not the place that is the most appropriate place. If you found in the street, means you're either gambling, you're either doing all sorts of inappropriate things. So the king tells this guy one thing: that street down there, don't hang out there. We don't want to find you there. And by that, everybody understood why he killed the other one. Because he probably was found there. And the king says, no, I can't have my guy hanging out in the casinos, in the places where the women are, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. So everybody understood why the first one got killed by how he gave the only thing that he told him. He didn't tell him, don't desecrate Shabbat, don't bring parties into the palace. He didn't tell him anything. He just told him, don't go to that street. With that, they understood why he killed the first one, and that's the hint that Rashi gives us. That when what's the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael? That they drank wine. Okay. Now, taking that hint, right after that, the Torah commands Aharon not to go into the Mishkan drinking wine. Okay. Now you're telling Aharon that. So what do you take from that? That if you're going by the opinion that they drank wine and went to the Mikdash, and right after that, Aaron gets the order, don't drink wine when you're going to your service. So from that, one can say, oh, maybe that was the sin of Nadav and Avihu, that they drank wine. And then they went into the Mikdash. You know if you want to lelamed zchut, to teach in a positive approach, why would they drink wine? Well, maybe they wanted to, it says yichnas yain yatsa sod. You drink wine, the secret comes out. Maybe they wanted to be in the right, I don't want to say they wanted to be in the mood, but some people drink wine to get in the mood. I don't know what mood, but maybe they wanted to be, some people think that if they will take some substance, it will open their mind, they'll be more receptive. I know some people come and tell me, not too long ago, somebody came and told me and asked me if it's okay to smoke marijuana. I said, for what purpose? He says, because I feel more spiritual when I smoke marijuana. So I don't know if that's going to be necessarily the approval from the Torah, because you feel more spiritual and you want to say, fine, get yourself other ways to be more spiritual. But maybe they wanted to drink more wine. I mean, listen, after all, it opens your heart, opens your mind. Maybe that's why they wanted to drink it. But nevertheless, right after that, the Torah orders Aharon that he cannot drink wine while he goes into his service. And from that, we take, okay, maybe that was their sin. That's why maybe Rabbi Ishmael says, they came in drunk. Not drunk, but they drank wine. Here, if this is the case, if we're going by this approach, then comes even a bigger question. If this is the prohibition, then why would they be punished for something they weren't commanded? Right? If we're going by the approach of Rabbi Ishmael, that they walked into the Mikdash after they drank wine, but if they weren't commanded for that, then why would they be punished for that? So that completely negates this opinion. You understand the question that I'm presenting? Because the Torah only after the fact prohibits Aharon with drinking wine. Obviously, Nadav and Avihu didn't get that prohibition. So why are you punishing them because they drank wine? But again, that's just a question that I'm saying and trying to explain the approach of the commentary. And again, when we want to understand this commentary, this approach, then we're going back to the parable that Rashi tells us about the king who had his second hand, what we just read, what I just told you in the Midrash. Why? What do you take from that? Because Rashi is giving us this story to strengthen the opinion of not drinking wine. Right? Because Rashi comes and says, Rabbi Ishmael says they were punished because they drank wine. Now we take one step forward, the Torah comes and says, after the fact, the Torah is giving the order, the command to Aharon not to do it. So I'm adding a question, so if they weren't commanded, why would they be punished for that? So Rashi comes and says, take the parable that I gave you about the king who had the servant, and from that you're going to understand why they were punished. Why? The servant was supposed to know what the king wants from him. If I'm the second to the king, and I have the codes to everything, and the king puts all the trust in me, I have the keys to the safe, the codes for everything. The master, the king gives me all the top secret things to do. Isn't it obvious that the king wouldn't want me hanging out in bars and casinos and in places that are inappropriate? Rashi says, Ben habayit amur lehavin et ratzon hamelech. The housekeeper, the second to the king, has to by himself come to the conclusion. Saying in other words, so what if Nadav and Avihu weren't commanded not to drink? They have to figure it out. Isn't it obvious? You're not going into the Mishkan after you drank wine. Kind of take two steps forward. Hashem is giving you the option of going into the Mishkan. Must be that He trusts you. Some common sense. Put two points together. You know, many times I get upset when my kid does something, one of my kids, and they tell me, but you didn't tell me not to do it. And I tell them, think for yourself. You can't, isn't it obvious to you? I need to tell you everything what to do or not to do. This is called common sense. Put two dots together, you'll get it by yourself. You're mature. That's what Rashi says about Nadav and Avihu. Isn't it obvious that you don't drink wine before you're going into the service? Come on. What are you, a little kid? That's the approach of Rashi supporting the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So what if they weren't commanded? Think for yourself. It's not appropriate to walk into the Mikdash after you had drank wine. Come on. That's the approach of Rashi on the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So now we have already three opinions. First opinion, they didn't wait for the fire to come from the sky. Second opinion is... I caught you by surprise. No. The first opinion is that the fire, they were supposed to come from the sky, right? What's the second opinion? Let's see, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. Rabbi Eliezer, what? Exactly. Rabbi Eliezer says they taught the halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. Third opinion, Rabbi Ishmael, they came in drunk or just drank wine. Three opinion already why they got killed. Okay, now there's another opinion, by the way. Another opinion says they weren't married. And again, this is all in the commentary. Okay, so if they weren't married, exactly. Now that you hekdamta oti. I was about to say, why? So they weren't married. Asma, lama. I'll tell you why. I was looking, why is the commentary, again, the commentary is not people like me and you, and we're talking here, the commentary is Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Ishmael, Rashi gives his commentary. But one of the commentaries says, Dem lo hayu nesuim, they weren't married. I ask, why? Like you. So what? So they weren't married, big deal. The Torah comes and gives a very interesting explanation. Why would they get married by not being married? Because it says a man becomes whole and complete only when he's married. Therefore, they weren't whole and complete, so that's not appropriate for them to come into the tabernacle, into the Mishkan, and service Hashem. This is called in the biblical term Baal Mum. It's not perfect. It has a deficiency, has a blemish, a defect. You can't take an animal that has a mum, that has a defect, and put it on the altar. So the Torah comes and says, listen, I'm sorry to tell you, you are not whole, you're not complete, you're not perfect before you got married. Therefore, you are Baal Mum. I can't, it's not right. You can't work in the Mikdash. You're not, you don't have the right mind. It's okay, that's one opinion. I'm not saying I'm agreeing with it, I'm just telling you one of the opinions. Okay, so with that said, we have already four commentaries, four opinions. Now we're stuck with one thing. The Torah didn't say anything about that. The Torah says Esh Zara. The Torah didn't say that they taught a halacha, a law in front of Moshe. The Torah doesn't say that they weren't married. The Torah doesn't say they were that they drank wine. The Torah tells me, Esh Zara, a foreign fire. But that's what it says in the Torah. Why are you starting to come up with all these commentaries? So and that was the first commentary, that the fire was supposed to come from above, and they were supposed to use that fire to light the incense. So if I have that, why do I need to go now for another three commentaries? Taught the halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu, drank wine, and weren't married. Why do I need all these options now? Okay, with that said, I'm left now with a situation of a tragedy of the death of two Kohanim, the sons of Aharon, in such a powerful day and an auspicious moment. Now, I'm looking at this situation now without having too much information. What do I come and think about Nadav and Avihu? Right? If I'm now analyzing the story. One commentary says they drank wine. Okay, I don't think they're that responsible. The other commentary says, well, they in a very inappropriate way taught halacha in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't think that great about them now. What impression does it leave you and me about these two righteous souls? You know what it seems from what we concluded till now? That they were, inappropriate, not mature, not responsible. I don't think highly about them right now, taking the last 20 minutes of what we're teaching. But nevertheless, this approach is not acceptable, and I can completely disqualify any type of way of saying that they weren't responsible, they weren't mature, they weren't right, and so forth. because of two words. If we wouldn't have these two words, then I would say, yes, they were irresponsible. They deserve it. Or they were immature. Or they were whatever. But the Torah comes and tells me two words. Bikdoshai akadesh. If you go into our parasha, chapter 10, verse 3, I'll read it in English, then I'll explain. The translation is, in Hebrew it's two words, in English it's 7 words, 8 words. I will be sanctified through those near to me. That's the translation of these two words, Bikdoshai akadesh. Saying in other words, Rashi says, these two boys, he's calling them boys. Could be that they were like in their 40s or 50s. Don't forget that Aharon was 83, right? So they had to be, even if Aharon had them when he was 60, they were still in their 20s. But Rashi says, Hane'arim ha'ele. Nar is a teenager. But Rashi says, Hane'arim ha'ele gdolim mimeni ve'mimecha. These two boys are greater than me and you, about Moshe and Aharon. They were so holy that they were holier than Moshe and Aharon. And if we wouldn't have these two words, then one might argue and say, yeah, they were irresponsible. They were, very immature, how this behavior. But the Torah comes and tells you, no, Bikrovai HaKadesh, Rashi says about these two words, they were holier than Moshe and Aharon. So if this is the case, so why would they behave like that? If the Torah comes and tells me clearly that they were holy, more than Aharon and Moshe, so why would they behave like that? Isn't it inappropriate for two holy souls to behave like this? Now comes even a bigger puzzle. On one side, we just spent now 20 minutes explaining very inappropriate behavior, right? Not waiting for the fire to come from above. Going in front of Moshe Rabbeinu in an inappropriate way. Drinking wine. Not married. So in one way, I'm saying, I'm sorry to tell you, they weren't fit to work in the Mikdash, to represent the entire nation. Therefore, Hashem had to put them to death. On the other hand, I'm now reading very clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aharon, no, they were holier than us. So now how I'm supposed to put these 2 points together? I'm the simple reader. I'm reading the Torah. I want to understand what happens here. Now I'm stuck in a puzzle because I have 2 extremes. One extreme, that they were inappropriate, immature, not responsible. But on the other hand, Moshe Rabbeinu comes and tells me, no. Sorry, they were very holy. So if they were very holy, why would they behave like that? Okay. For this puzzle, finally, we find the conclusion or the answer by the Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim explains it in a way that we can take from that something. Now he says, I will tell you in my words how he explains it, but he says sometimes you hear a story, all the details of the story are true, but you didn't hear the motive. Okay? So I'm telling you, you hear a story. Somebody comes and tells you a story. Or you see a situation. And you judge the story based on the details, and the details are 100% true. But you don't know the motive, or you don't know the essence of the story. And then what happens is, then the story, once you know the motive, the story is completely different. Okay? And I'm just simplifying the words of the Or HaChaim. And again, I'll repeat it in more softer words. How many times you hear a story, you see something with your own eyes, you know all the details, but you don't know the essence or the motive, and you look at the story a certain way, then you find out the essence of the story or the motive, suddenly everything looks completely different. I'll tell you a story. One time, I was on a train, and there was a boxcar, however you call it, and I was sitting minding my own business. There's a few other people sitting there minding their own business. And there was a group of kids at the end making noise, jumping, throwing things. Really, everybody was annoyed. And their father is sitting next to them. And of course, me and everybody else is like, making all these... and thinking, why can't the father shut them up? Jumping here, it's a public place, we're all in the same box train. It's annoying, they're making noise, they're jumping up and down, they're throwing things, behaving in a loud way. How come the father's not saying anything?
Here in Israel?
It doesn't matter, it happened in America, but it's irrelevant. But the point is that me and everybody else, we're looking at the father and they don't understand. Why isn't he saying anything? That's not nice. That's not nice. At some point, somebody comes and approaches the father and says to them, maybe you can talk to them, or why you think that, why the kids are so noisy? They're kind of disturbing everybody. Don't you have some solution to tell them? Don't you have like something to tell them to calm them down? So the father says, I'm very sorry, I don't know how to quiet them down. We just came back now from their mother's funeral and they're all very upset and I'm lost of words. I don't know how to calm them down. Suddenly, everything changed. That person came, took out some chocolate out of his bag, started giving the kids some chocolate. Suddenly, a minute before that, we're all looking and upset at the kids and upset at the father. Why isn't he quieting them down? And a second later, we're finding out they just came back from their mother's funeral and they're upset. And the father's like, listen, I'm lost in words. I don't even know what to do. Coming to tell you in simple words, sometimes you see a story, you are very judgmental towards what's going on, but you don't know what's going on behind the story. You don't know the motive, you don't know the essence. And finally, when you hear what's going on, suddenly you see everything in a completely different way. This is the approach of the Or HaChaim. And the Or HaChaim says, you know what? Everything was right. Everything that we just read in the commentary was all right. They didn't wait for the fire to come from above. And they talked in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. And they weren't married. And they drank wine. Everything was right. So now stop for a second, because I told you, if I'm looking at everything, then I'm being judgmental and I'm saying they're irresponsible, they're immature, they're not appropriate. Whoa, you don't know. It's right, but you don't know really what's going on there. So the Or HaChaim says, everything that we just says, it's right, they did that. But there's one detail that you don't know. Okay. Before we're going to go and explain this detail, we have to understand something. The Torah comes and says that they sacrificed Hekrivu Esh Zara. They came with a fire that was not supposed to be used. And again, the translation of Esh Zara is a foreign fire. They brought fire that wasn't from the right place. Okay. So now, before we proceed, let's present a question. If the Torah is coming and saying and repeating that the problem was this Esh Zara, then why do I need to find any reasons for their death? The Torah came and told me, Hikrivu Esh Zara. That's it. Why do I need to go to commentaries now? Why do I need to dig now in the file and find out that they weren't married, that they drank wine, that they didn't wait for the fire, they talked in front of... What does it matter? No? The Torah came and told me, Hikrivu Esh Zara. That's it. And this should be sufficient. They came with a fire that was foreign. Why do I need to dig now in the case? As they say, why do I need to open a can of worms? Who cares? More than that, there's another approach, or you can look at it as a commentary. This was brought by a commentary that is called Turei Zahav. Turei Zahav is David Halevi Segal. For the ones who learn Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch has what's called kelim, the vessels. He's one of the kelim, the Taz. The ones who learn Shulchan Aruch, they know the commentary of the Taz. Taz is the acronym of Turei Zahav. But he lived about 400 years ago, give or take, died in the late 1600s. But nevertheless, he comes and gives an interesting approach. And he says, he quotes from the Torah verse, and I'll read it to you, Vatetze esh lifnei Hashem, and fire came out from God, vatochal otam, and consumed them, vayamutu, and they died. Now let me translate. And fire went forth from the Lord and consumed them, and they died. Oh, so I think I'm missing a detail here. Because when the action happened, I told you, fire came from the sky, went into their nostrils, pulled their neshama out, and they died. But now we have a different way of looking at it. We have a verse that says, Vatetze esh, the fire came out, vatochal otam, and consumed them, comma, and they died. Have you ever seen fire consuming a person and he doesn't die? So why does the Torah have to tell me the words? And they died. Vayamutu. I don't need this word. Because it says in Hebrew, Vatochal otam. The fire consumed them. Of course they died. I didn't see anybody that the fire consumes them and they don't die. So why do I need a word here that says, and they died? There's not two, there's four. There's Avraham Avinu that was thrown into the fire, and the fire didn't affect him. And there's also Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that were thrown into the fire, and it didn't consume them. And maybe there's other people. But most people, when the fire consumes them, they die. So what is the Taz trying to tell me here? The fire consumed them, comma, and they died. The Taz says, Mikan mevin ani shayu shtei inyanim. He says, from this I understand there were two things here. Two separate things. Vayamutu, and they died, is a certain act that they did that we don't know of, that Hashem knew. I mean, you can't hide anything from Hashem. For the fact that they didn't wait for the right fire, spoke in front of Moshe, drank the wine, weren't married, the Orachim says it was all right. So for that, the fire came out and consumed them. And they died, Vayamutu, there was one other thing that we don't know of, a certain act that they did, only Hashem knew, and that caused them to die. And one might argue, says, but they were consumed, they already died. Why again they died? Okay. So before we continue, there was another action that from that all the commentaries are trying to understand. Because I told you before, the question that I presented, if the Torah comes and tells me that they were playing with foreign fire, isn't this sufficient? Why do I need our commentaries trying to dig in the case? So the Taz comes and says, of course the commentary are trying to dig in the case, because there was another act that obviously we don't know what it was. Okay. So now I have another puzzle. Up until now, every time I read the term Vatetze esh, fire will came out, or how it was translated, and fire went forth, it was in a positive way. Up until now, every time that I read in the Torah Vatetze esh, I can connect it to something positive. Why now it changed? Why now when the Torah says Vatetze esh and fire went forth, now it's connected to something negative? And of course comes now another question. As lama yamutu. So why would they die? I'm now left with another question. If the fire consumed them, then why would they die? Then of course from that we understand there was another action. Okay, so what was this other action? So the Or HaChaim explains. Okay. Before we explain what the Or HaChaim says, I have to explain to you a story. There's a famous Tana, Rabbi Akiva. I'm sure you all heard of him. He had a daughter. And this daughter, he had other kids, but this daughter obviously was his prize, his gem. And since she was a little girl, he was already looking for her, for the right man. Now, what better place to be? He has 24,000 students. It's a good way of choosing a good chatan for your daughter. So he was constantly looking, who's going to be the best one that when the day will come, will marry off to my daughter. Okay. And he was going and searching and looking. And then he had his eye on one of his students. This student was called Ben Azai. And I'm sure the name is familiar. Techev, I'll tell you why it's familiar to you. But he had his eye on this Ben Azai. And why did he like him? Because he was very diligent. He was very consistent. In Hebrew, it's called matmid. We just now learn about the fire that goes on the altar. It's called esh tamid. Esh tamid tukad al hamizbeach. What is esh tamid? That's the constant fire. But what's the word tamid? The translation is constant, but tamid means lehatmid. If I want to take something, a message from it, then I need to latmid. I have to be very consistent. Punctual. The other day, what's the word? Punctual? Punctual, I would say, is more being... I think latmid is when you're very diligent and when you're very consistent. The other day I was praying Mincha. Some guy came to me after the prayer and he told me, I learned in yeshiva, I saw your near-death experience video, it inspired me. Give me some word of chizuk, give me some word to strengthen me. I'm in yeshiva now. And I said, okay, you want some word of chizuk? Then now we just word, esh tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tichbeh, the constant fire should burn constantly on the altar. Then the secret to success in growing in the Torah is latmid. You have to be consistent. Told him it took me years till I started understanding things, till I was able to learn, to learn by myself. I was about to give up. Look at Rabbi Akiva, how many years he invested. I told him it's all about latmid, being consistent. Okay. Going back to the story with Rabbi Akiva, why did he like Ben Azai? Ki haya matmid. He was very consistent. Okay. Comes the day, the daughter was ready, and they made a wedding. Here, there's a disagreement between the sages if it was really a wedding or if there was just an engagement party, but it's irrelevant. They made a big party, and again, the story says they made a wedding. Archu chatuna. But in the olden days, and by the way, some communities still do it. In the olden days, they would make a big party. This is called the irusin, an engagement, and only a year later they would get married. And some communities, they still do it. They do a big party, that's the engagement, and only a year later they do the party, the actual wedding. But nevertheless, it's less relevant. They made the party, everybody was happy. Now, can you imagine Rabbi Akiva, the Rebbe of the generation, is making such a party? Everybody came. Can you imagine? From all walks of from everywhere, everybody came. Ministers, business people, rabbis, to be in the simcha of Rabbi Akiva. Okay. A few days pass. Ben Azai comes to the daughter and says, I'm calling the whole thing off. What do you mean you're calling the whole thing off? He gives her an answer. Chashka nafshi b'Torah. My soul is yearning to the Torah. I want to devote myself to the Torah. I can't be bothered now with a wife and coming to dinner and then kids and changing diapers and I have to take you and teach you and support you. I'm sorry, it's not for me. I'm not built for this. And he gave her 3 words. Chashka nafshi b'Torah. My soul just desires the Torah. I don't want to be involved in worldly things. Okay. So they came and said, the destiny, the goral of the daughter is like the mother. In our days they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They said, habat kmo ha'ima, the daughter is like the mother. Why? So if you remember when Rachel, the wife of Rabbi Akiva, married Rabbi Akiva, she didn't see him for 24 years. He says, I have to go and learn Torah. First started 12 years, then he came back. She had a conversation with a friend, and she said, the friend says, doesn't bother you, your husband, you didn't see him for 12 years? And she says, if it was up to me, I would tell him to stay another 12 years. Rabbi Akiva made a U-turn, went back for another 12 years. 24 years, Rachel didn't see her wife, her husband. So they said, okay, like daughter, like mother. Okay. What's interesting here, I told you before the name Ben Azai should sound familiar to you. In case it doesn't sound familiar, I will explain to you where it sounds familiar, because there were 4 rabbis who went into the orchard, right? And orchard means they dived into the depth of the Torah. And many commentary says they were doing the right acts to have aliyat neshama, to while they're alive, I don't want to use the word astral project, but to leave their bodies and go to the world above and to dive into the secrets of the Torah. The only one who survived is Rabbi Akiva. Nichnas b'shalom, yatsa b'shalom. So Ben Azai was one of them. What does it say about Ben Azai? Hitzitz, he peeked in, v'met, and died. So, what do we take from this story? That some people don't get married, and I know a few people like that. They want to be devoted to the Torah, and they don't want to get married. Why? Because they, one might say they don't fit this world. It's not part of their nature to have a wife, to have kids, to fit in the world. They're completely not in touch with this world. So the Orach Chaim says, Nadav and Avihu, they were such holy souls. They were so holy that they didn't see any connection to this world. That everything that they did was because they had such a desire to leave this world. They didn't want to be in this world. They were so, holy and lofty that their act was not done in an evil way. Their desire was so strong just to be one with Hashem, just to leave the body. They couldn't, this is called klot nefesh. And there are people that they don't want to be involved in this world. They just want to be immersed in the Torah. So the Orach Chaim says, they didn't come from a bad place. They were so lofty and so holy. That's what they wanted to do. But nevertheless, Hashem didn't agree with that. Hashem wasn't happy with that, and they made a mistake. So this act that we looking, what was so wrong? Forget about everything else that we just explained now for the past hour. Their act is that they just wanted to jump out of the body. They did not want to be in their body. And they were looking for a way, how can I just attach myself to Hashem? So the Orach Chaim says, that was their act, but Hashem didn't agree with that. And nevertheless, he was upset with that. And they made a mistake. As they say, with all the good intentions, their intention was good intentions. They just wanted to connect with Hashem. But nevertheless, they made a mistake. Now with that, let me explain to you the conclusion, what we take from all this. So there's a story that I heard many years ago about a certain individual. Some of you maybe know of him. His name is Professor Green. A very famous professor that is Jewish, and somewhere along the line met a rabbi who started introducing to the Torah to him. And there's a story that one time he was about to fly to some convention, I don't know what, it's not so important. The rabbi calls him and tells him, can you do me a favor? Of course. When you take this flight, can you order a kosher meal? He says, but I don't eat kosher. Kitchen is not kosher. I don't follow the kosher diet. The rabbi tells him, for me, please, if you can order a kosher meal, that would be great. So the professor tells him, why do you need me to order a kosher meal? He says, because, you are a celebrity, you're famous, and if you would order a kosher meal, it's going to be out and advertised. Professor Green ordered a kosher meal. It would do a Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of Hashem. A Jew orders a kosher meal, even if he's not so observant. I think it would do headlines. Okay, fine, I'll order the kosher meal. Okay, this professor goes on the flight, and the time for the food is coming, and he's waiting and waiting and waiting. Everybody's getting their trays, and he's waiting and waiting. He thought, okay, maybe the kosher meals, they come last. And they finish serving, and he didn't get anything. He calls the stewardess and says, I didn't get any food. What's your name? She looks, and she says, what food did you order? He says, I ordered the kosher meal. We're so sorry, we forgot to board on the plane a kosher meal. What? Now he's in a bind. What, he's going to make a whole fuss out of it? That's not going to look nice, that he's being upset. He's a celebrity, he's a famous person, a professor. He can't get upset now. Now he's in a bigger bind, so he can't say, okay, give me the regular meal, because how is that going to look that he ordered the kosher meal, then he didn't get, okay, give me the not kosher one. That's not going to look good. So he's standing there, he's starving. Now he's starting to get upset, and the stomach is moving there, you get upset. And needless to say, if they didn't board the breakfast, they also didn't board the dinner. And he's starving. I don't have to tell you, when a person is hungry, you're upset. So he starts getting upset. Why did I listen? Why would I follow through? Who needs this kosher meal? What is this nonsense? He starts getting upset at himself. Why did he comply? And of course, then he gets upset at the rabbi. Why would I listen? Why would he ask me such a thing? And worse, he gets upset at Hashem. I need to sanctify now this name of Hashem. Hashem is big enough without me. I need to order kosher food. He got so upset that when he landed, instead of running to eat, he goes and calls the rabbi. What did you do? Why did you ask me to get a kosher meal? I didn't get anything. I'm starving. Okay, the rabbi doesn't know what to say. So he tells him, you know what? I'm looking now in front of me at the food area, and I see there a stand with hot dogs. I'm going to go and order now a hot dog, and it's not kosher, and I'm going to eat it, and it's because of you. Anyways, so the rabbi tells him, listen, I know you're hungry, but please don't eat this hot dog. What? He says, please don't eat this hot dog. It's not kosher. He tells him, up until now I thought you're crazy. Now I know you're crazy. I'm going to eat this hot dog, and it's because of you. So the rabbi tells him, remember a few days ago we were sitting in the Shabbat meal, and I was asking everybody what defines a person to be called or to be found a Jew, right? He says, yeah, I remember that. And he says, and what was the answer? So one person answers, what defines you a Jew? So one person answered, when you meditate in the morning before you pray on the greatness of Hashem. Okay. Another person says that you're able to read a page of Gemara and to teach it, to give it over. Okay. Another person says that you sit in a meal like now in Purim and you drink l'chaim and you drink and you drink and you drink till you're completely drunk. Okay. So the rabbi says, all of these answers, they're all wrong. The professor tells him, what are you trying to tell me? I'm starving now. What are you trying to, are you driving me crazy? So the rabbi tells him, what defines a Jew? That he's starving and he's about to eat the hot dog and he doesn't. Tells him, now I'm sure you are crazy. I thought you were crazy. Now I know you're crazy. You're telling me what defines a Jew is that he's starving and he's about to eat a hot dog and he doesn't? Tells him yes. He tells him, why do you think Hashem created the world? You think Hashem created the world for you to learn or to teach Torah? The entire heavens is full of Torah. You think Hashem created the world for learning Torah, teaching Torah, doing the mitzvot? He has it all up there. You know why Hashem created the world? Is when a hungry person is starving and he's about to eat an unkosher hot dog and he says, no, I'm not going to eat it because Hashem doesn't allow me. Hashem doesn't want me to eat this hot dog even though I'm hungry. So needless to say that he hung up the phone and stayed hungry. That was the story. So with that story, we can take and understand what was the mistake of Nadav and Avihu. They wanted to learn. They wanted to pray. It's all good. They wanted to be close to Hashem. But everything that they did was a esh zara, was foreign, because Hashem didn't command them to do it. The fact that their intention was good, the fact that that's what they wanted, it doesn't mean that's what Hashem wants. And that was the problem. Hashem doesn't want us to run away from our body. Hashem wants us to take the body and to refine it and to change it. That's really what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us to overpower our desire. And they did not overpower their desire. The fact that they were so holy, great. The fact that they wanted to cleave unto Hashem and to be one with Hashem, that's all great. But that wasn't Hashem's will. Hashem didn't command them to do that. Therefore, they were punished. They had to die. And that's really the message that we need to take from that. It's not about what I think or what I want. It's what Hashem wants and what Hashem tells me to do. And like in the story, Hashem didn't create the world for me to learn Torah and to do mitzvot. Hashem created the world when I'm hungry and when I'm starving and when I'm thinking of my own body, but the food in front of me is not kosher, then I say, no, I can't eat it. Why? Not because it makes sense, because that's what Hashem wants. That's the will of Hashem, that I overpower my desire, that I overpower my lust. You know, it says that Nadav and Avihu got incarnated 3 times. I mean, they didn't reach a tikkun. They didn't reach a rectification. They died before their time. Their last incarnation came in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I'm hoping that this name is familiar to you, because less than a month from now we're going to be sitting in Leil Seder and we're going to read about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That he was the youngest president, I mean, not president like what we know now presidents. Nasi means the top of the Sanhedrin. He was the youngest that ever was a Nasi. He was 18. It says that overnight his beard became white. They got incarnated, their last visit, they got incarnated to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now, very interesting, even though he was the Nasi, he wasn't such a big scholar or like a person that all day long was in the shul. He was very, very wealthy. The Talmud says that he was so wealthy that he would give every year 12,000 calves. That was his maaser as a mincha. 12,000 calves. Just imagine that his cattle would produce 120,000 cattle every year. Imagine what was a multimillionaire. Anyways, he was into business. He wasn't into necessarily learning. He had a business. Okay, happened to be that he also was learned and also became the Nasi. He was what's called a kadosh, holy. But he was able to bring down the kedusha to the world, to penetrate the holiness into this world. Very easy to sit in a yeshiva all day long and learn Torah. Hashem says, that's what I created you for. I created you to deal with this world. So it's amazing how did they reach their tikkun, their rectification, that they got incarnated in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who basically did the complete opposite from them. Instead of being all day long in the shul, in the yeshiva and learning, he was running businesses. He was involved in the world, doing charity, doing acts of kindness, of course also learning and praying. But he was able to bring down the kedusha into this world. So when you're looking at this tragic story, that brings us to the thought, why is the Torah even presenting such a thing? And what can I take from that? Is that everything that they did, yeah, it was true, it was right, they did it, but with the wrong intention. They weren't putting their focus on the right thing. And the message we need to take from this powerful act, from this powerful scene in the Torah, is that it's not about what I want. It's not what I desire. It's not what I want to do for myself. Hashem tells me, I run the show. I want you to live in your body, deal with your challenges, deal with your desires, deal with your lusts, and to know when to say no. Why? That's the will of Hashem. This is Ratzon HaBoreh. Some people ask you, why do you do this and that? You don't have to give explanations. That's what Hashem wants. So He commanded me to do that. Then I'm not looking now for all the excuses and reasons why. So what we need to take from this amazing encounter, and when I want to understand what is the Torah coming and telling me, is that it's not about what I want, even if my intentions are the greatest of all. Sometimes, not too long ago, one of my kids, they broke something valuable in our house. And I was like, why would you do that? The kid, I wanted to fix the house, but when you come home, it will be all neat and organized. So the intention was good, but from the excitement, something fell and broke. So you can be upset at the child. They only wanted to do something good. Of course, the message to the child was, listen, your intentions were good, but this you can't touch. Why? Because you can't touch. Same thing here. We have many times a lot of good intentions. Sometimes you want to interfere and to help and to do something. You have to understand that when it comes to my own desires and my own challenges, I have to understand I have to do what Hashem wants, not what I want. And that's really the message we need to take from this portion, from this part of the parasha. I will summarize it in a few words. It's not about you and about what you want. It's about what Hashem wants and what Hashem commands you to do.